be posting this to our website. So everyone who is on this meeting now, you can refer back to this session at any point if you have questions or you'd like to get this information again. If you do have questions throughout the session, please feel free to put those in the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat throughout and can take those questions. And as always, we'll have time at the end to be able to answer any questions that you might have.
And hi, everyone. I'm Stephen Klimek again, he, him pronouns, and I'm the TOD Grant Program Manager. So for today's webinar, we're going to cover all of the essential information and technical details for the 2023 LCDA and TOD Development Grant programs. So we're going to talk through an overview of our program goals that really drive all of our work, recent changes to the programs from previous years, some key details such as dates, scoring, and eligible uses of grant funds. We'll also do some outlines of example past projects and summarize some resources available to all of our potential and prospective applicants before having time to answer any questions that you have in the chat or that come up at the end. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Hannah to get us started.
Thanks, Stephen. So the goals for LCDA and TOD are very similar. The shared goals are to maximize connections, create more housing choice in the project area, to minimize impacts on climate change, and to support a more equitable region. The TOD program does place more emphasis on dense development that increases transit ridership. And while compact development is important in LCDA, there's not necessarily an emphasis on increased transit ridership. So before we talk about eligible cities, I want to make a note of who can apply and who receives funds if you are awarded a grant. Only participating cities, counties, or development authorities like an HRA or an EDA are eligible to apply for LCA. So developers or community organizations will partner and collaborate on the application, but they can't actually submit that application. If you are awarded a grant, those funds are going to go to the government partner, not directly to the developer. And Stephen is now going to go over what cities need to do to be eligible.
So to participate in LCA, cities need to be part of the Local Housing Incentives Program and establish goals for affordable and life cycle housing with the Met Council. Right now, we have 76 cities participating, and LCA runs on a 10-year re-enrollment cycle that we just restarted a couple of years ago, but cities can elect to participate at any point in that process. We want to note also that in addition to other application requirements that we'll talk through, cities applying for projects that involve housing must have an adopted fair housing policy in order to receive fund disbursements from an award. So a city can apply without a fair housing policy in place yet, but if awarded, won't be able to receive those funds until that policy is adopted. And we're happy to answer more questions on that if that's a situation you're in. Additionally, the TOD program is only eligible to projects in targeted geographies along high-frequency transit. And these are located throughout the region's transit network and are eligible to cities that also are in and elect to participate in the LCA program, which again includes the participating in the Local Housing Incentives Program and establishing those goals for affordable and life cycle housing.
So over the last 2 years, we have made some very small changes to the program. There are more points available toward the minimum equity score. What previously was the jobs category is now economic opportunity. So we're looking at economic opportunity more broadly rather than just jobs creation. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail when we talk about scoring. General construction costs and general landscaping costs are an eligible expense for affordable housing projects. And to be considered affordable, the units need to be affordable at or below 60% AMI for a minimum of 15 years. General construction and rehab and preservation is also now an eligible cost for commercial projects. We have brought back the solar eligibility, so solar will be eligible as a use for the grant funds. Pedestrian safety improvements are eligible now, so this includes any measures that you're taking in your site design to make it safer for people to walk, bike, or roll throughout your site. And finally, the purple line and new high frequency routes are eligible for TOD. And if you have any questions excuse me, if you have any questions about whether or not your project is in a TOD eligible area, you can look at the Make a Map link on our website, or feel free to reach out to Stephen if you have any TOD specific questions.
So to get into some more specific program details for this year, the Livable Communities Demonstration Account, or LCDA, program has $9.3 million of funding available to award. Applicants are limited to submitting 3 LCDA applications. And if eligible applications from suburban communities request more than 60% of the available funds, no more than 40% of the funds can be awarded to the city of Minneapolis and the city of St. Paul together. So it's a geographic split across the LCDA program about how that funding can be distributed across the pool of applicants. And for the Transit-Oriented Development, or TOD program, there's $5.3 million of funding available to award. Applicants here are also limited to submitting 3 applications, but award limits are different for this program, and cities have a total combined award maximum of $2 million that can be split between 1 or up to 3 projects, depending on the total request. So as Hannah mentioned, the TOD program is limited to specific geographies with high frequency transit. So again, check the LCA website and the Make a Map tool to explore if you're in a TOD area and if that's a program you think you'll be competitive in. If any non-city based applicants like a county are planning to submit an application, we encourage you to coordinate that with the city where the project is located, because LCA award limits are geographic and not necessarily by applicant. And if you're in a situation like that, please reach out and we're happy to talk through it.
The applications for both programs will open on July 17th this year, and applications are going to be due on August 14th. We expect funding recommendations to go to council for approval mid-December. And keep in mind when you're thinking about the timeline of your grant that any activities you start before the awards are recommended will not be eligible for funding. The only exception to that is site acquisition, which can support purchases made within 1 year before the application date. So if you have purchased a property between August 14th of 2022 and August 14th of 2023, that can be eligible for the site acquisition look back. The grant terms are 3 years, which means that all of your awarded activities need to be finished within that grant term. If you need to, we can offer a grant extension of up to 2 years. We just ask that you make sure our grant administrator knows as soon as possible that you need an extension. And this is true for any project changes. So if your project changes in any way, we really ask that you coordinate with our grants administrator to make sure that he's aware of any grant changes and we can talk through what that might mean. So we've gone over a decent amount of information so far, and I just want to take a break here and see if anyone has any questions for us. And we're going to be going into more of the scoring and example projects in this next section. But I want to see if anyone has questions about what we've gone over so far, and you can put those questions in the chat, raise your hand, or just come off of mute. Yes, I see, Aaron, you have a question. Are you able to unmute? You can put it in the chat. Okay, I will unmute you, Aaron. I'm not sure why it's not letting me unmute you. Erin, if you could put your question in the chat, I will read it out for everyone and I will answer your question. And while Erin is getting, okay, Here we have the question. Is income averaging considered affordable if the overall AMI is 60% or less? That is a great question. So when we're looking at the income averaging, we're looking at how many units you think will be at 60% or less. And that's how we are considering the scoring for income averaging projects. And income averaging is something that is relatively new to the program. We haven't seen a lot of income averaging projects. We're seeing more, I would say, in the last 3 or 4 years. But it's something that's fairly new. So when you're applying for a project that is an income averaging project, there will be a section of questions in the housing section of the application that asks you about the income averaging, how many units you think will be affordable at or below 60% AMI, and how you're looking at structuring the income averaging. All right, if anyone else has any questions as we're going through the session, again, please just put those in the chat. It looks like we're having some trouble unmuting folks, so we can focus on the chat and answer questions here. So for LCDA grants, should cities or developers be the one applying? So cities, either the city, the HRA, the EDA, or the county, whoever your government partner is, does need to be the one to apply for that grant. And if you're awarded a grant, that money will actually go to the city. So our formal relationship is with the city. It's typically the city, whoever the government partner is. So when the grant agreement is signed, that agreement is between the Met Council and the city. And then the development team will work with the city on how they will get those funds dispersed out to the development team. So the city will need to set up the application in WebGrants. And the way that will work, we ask that the city partners send us a list of everyone who's going to be collaborating on that application. Everyone who's going to be collaborating on the application will need to register for a WebGrants account, and then we will connect you to the application so that you can collaborate on the application. All right, so we will move into the scoring section now, and Stephen is going to start us off talking about scoring.
Perfect. And those are great foundational questions. And to lay the foundation for scoring, we want to highlight this first, that LCA is focused on addressing racial inequity in the region, given race is the largest predictor of inequitable outcomes in all of our priority areas, such as jobs and housing. So for both the LCDA and the TOD programs, projects addressing racial equity will be prioritized in scoring. Projects addressing other inequities will earn points towards how they address those inequities, but will not receive full points unless they also consider the intersection of racial inequity. So there's a number of explicit equity criteria that are noted in the scoring tables for both programs. And this is all for the step 1 of the scoring, and there are a total of 18 points related to equity criteria in step 1. And applicants must score a minimum of 12 of those points to be eligible for consideration and move into the next phase of review.
Scoring for both of the programs is done through a 2-step process. So the first step is an internal review of council staff from different divisions. And like Stephen mentioned, projects need to meet both a minimum overall score as well as that minimum equity score to be able to move from step 1 into step 2. So the step 2 review is done by an external review committee called the Livable Communities Advisory Committee, or the LCAC. And you'll see in the scoring tables and in the evaluation explanations that the criteria are divided into step 1 and step 2. And not all of the projects coming in are going to advance into the second round of review. The LCDA and TOD scoring follows the same scoring structure. For each of the sections, we strongly recommend that you look at the evaluation explanations for each program. And we can drop a link into the chat for each of those. The explanations will give you more information on exactly how we're going to be reviewing your application. These are the questions that reviewers will be asking themselves and examples of how to achieve points. So those questions that reviewers are going to be asking themselves, we put those directly into the score sheets. So reviewers are looking back to those as they're scoring your application. The examples that are in the evaluation explanations are not exhaustive, but it just gives you a better idea of what we are looking for and how we're thinking about those scoring criteria. The first section of scoring is the what, or the project outcomes. And in this section, we're looking at how well your project is addressing the program goals that we talked about earlier. We're scoring you on housing, jobs and economic opportunity, compact and connected development, and environment and livability. So this section is really looking at what your project is and what you're trying to achieve through this project. Deeper levels of affordability, inclusion of workforce development programs, a focus on environmental justice, and introducing complementary uses into the project are all examples of how a project could achieve points in this what section. The next section is the how, or your project process. And here we're looking at your community engagement process, how you determined the need for the project, and any steps that the city is taking to address equity and reduce disparities in the city. And that next section, or the who section, is really looking at your project team. In this section, we are going to be looking at how representative your project team is of the community your project is intending to serve, the partners you're bringing together to do the project, and how you're planning to fund the project. And a few notes on this section. Having more partners does not necessarily equate to getting more points. In this section, we're really looking at the intent behind those partnerships. So we want to know, why have you brought this group together that you've brought together? And we'll ask about your funding sources in the application. Those sources do not have to be committed. You don't get any additional points for having committed sources. We just want to see what your plans are for the project. And finally, we're going to be looking at your overall approach to equitable development. And this section is in addition to the equitable development criteria in each of the scoring sections. So this is scored in step 2, and it gives the external review committee the opportunity to look at your approach to equitable development a little bit more broadly.
So for the TOD program, the scoring sections and two-step process that Hannah outlined is the same across both programs. You're going to see the same what, how, who, and overall equity approach in the structure and the kinds of questions. The key distinction in the TOD program is that it's really providing funding, dedicated funding for development along the region's transit system. And the program emphasizes growing the size and diversity of both the stationary activity and transit ridership that's happening inside of that. So this really comes down and focuses on the compact connected development category within the what section of scoring. And there's a lot more points available in this section. There's a couple additional criteria around walkability and urban design and urban connectivity issues in that what section of scoring.
So we mentioned at the beginning of this session some of the changes that we had made and mentioned eligible activities. In the application, you will list out what specific activities you would like funded using the grant money. There is a complete list of eligible and ineligible activities on our website and in the Program Essentials document. In general, development grants are supporting the more tangible construction-related phase of your project. We can support things like stormwater management systems, district-wide energy systems, public space, public art, pedestrian improvements. We can still support community engagement and design fees in this section. And then just as a reminder, general construction and rehab for commercial projects are eligible this year. If you have any questions about the eligibility of an activity that you want to include in the application, just reach out. We are more than happy to talk through it with you before you apply. And I highly recommend checking on eligible activities before you apply, because once you apply, you submit the application. If there are ineligible activities in the application, we just strike those out and your request amount is reduced. So if there's any question about eligible activities, Check in with us before you submit the application. As I mentioned earlier, with the exception of acquisition, we cannot pay for any work that was done before the grant is awarded. The grants are dispersed on a reimbursement basis, and if you are awarded a grant, we will go over this in a lot more detail when you get your grant agreement, and we offer orientation for all of the project teams to go over what the disbursement process looks like and what that grant administration process is going to look like over the term of your grant.
So additionally, there's some kind of limited categories of eligible activities for our programs. Site acquisition and holding costs are eligible, but limited to projects with affordable housing, or in some cases, projects that are providing living wage jobs. Additionally, affordable housing projects are eligible for preservation and rehab costs, as well as those general construction costs. And if you're interested in applying with any of these uses in your project budget or have questions, again, reach out before submitting, and we're happy to talk through all of those.
And I see we've got a question here in the chat. Is there any difference in scoring if a project asks for a specific item, such as stormwater management versus general construction? No. So the items that you're requesting funding for are not in any way related to your scoring. I think the only nuance there is if you're requesting funding for something that is part of your project outcomes that are, so like with a stormwater management example, if you're requesting funding for something that's going to help improve the environmental sustainability piece, that could be part of your scoring, but what we're really looking at there is the environmental sustainability piece rather than where the money is coming from. So if you get the money for that environmental sustainability piece from us, or you get it from a different source, the source of that funding is not taken into consideration in terms of how we look at the project outcome. All right. We have a very wide array of resources available to support you as you complete your application. And all of these resources are available on our website, either in the website body or as a PDF that you can download and print out. So on the program pages, we have all of the key information about the programs like scoring, eligible activities, application due dates, and amount of funding available. We also have a frequently asked questions section and past recordings of technical assistance sessions. So the past sessions are topic focused and might help you better understand how your project can meet LCA goals. So these were held a couple of years ago, but the information is still very relevant to the scoring this year. We also have a document called the Program Essentials that you can download. This has the key dates, the funding amounts, the eligible activities, and the scoring criteria. And this is helpful to keep handy just as a quick guide. But I really want to draw your attention again to those evaluation explanations. In my opinion, I think these are the most valuable resource that we have available to applicants in understanding how we are going to be reviewing your application. If you have applied in the last couple of years, you might remember that there was a project data profile that we sent you. Last year was the first year that we moved this over to an online mapping tool. This gives you the same information. We're using the online mapping tool again. Stephen is going to go over a little bit more detail about that in the next slide. But before we move into that, I want to call out that we have 2 resource libraries with additional resources available on our website. So the application library on the apply page of our website has sample resolutions and sample fair housing policies. And remember that the fair housing policy is required if you are going to have funds dispersed to you. And also on that page, we have web grants tips to help out project teams navigating the web grants site. And we also have some tips for project teams to work together. Those tips came from talking with past successful project teams about what worked well for them. And on our resource library, we have a collection of resources on topics related to LCA goals like sustainability, equitable development, and transportation design.
So So to key in on, again, that project data profile mapping tool that Hannah mentioned, this is really now a self-serve interactive map that you can find on the program page under the Technical Assistance tab of either the LCDA or the TOD page. And the tool really provides a large range of quantitative census tract level data points. There's going to be a number of application questions that will ask you to put your product into the context of its surrounding geography and community, including referencing data points that are available in this profile. So as you see those project data profile prompts in your questions, this is where we're looking for you to go to get a better sense of where your project fits into both census tract, city, and regional level data points. Again, if you have any questions on what you're seeing in there or how to put that into context for your project and application, reach out to us as you're putting your responses together.
So we're going to now move into talking about past projects that have been successful. And like we did with the last section shift, I'm going to take a second here and just see if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask about information that we've gone over so far. Okay, we will jump into project examples now, and don't hesitate to put any questions in the chat that you might have. So this project here is an affordable housing project that is designed to serve families who have had recent child protection interactions, have been unhoused, or are experiencing housing instability. And the goal of the project was to provide stable housing along with supportive services like educational and job training. The project included several family-sized units at or below 30% AMI. And a few things stood out about this project during the review process. Most of the units in the project were below 30% AMI, and 7 of those units had 3 or 4 bedrooms at 30% AMI, which is not something that we see very often. And in addition to the deeply affordable units, the project team was very thoughtful in providing services in the building that would help families trying to find more stability. So they had an engagement process that was led by Juxtaposition Arts, which is a local youth arts organization. They included families in the neighborhood who had experienced housing instability, in addition to including service providers on providing recommendations on the building design and programming for the building. So the project team was very intentional about bringing in partners who had experience working with the targeted population and who had lived experience that was similar to those who would be living in this new development. So the deep affordability and the intention in the project design and the project partnerships really made this project stand out for us. This next project is to highlight an example of a non-housing project. So here we have the 30,000 feet project. This is an arts and tech center led by the Black Arts and Tech Group, 30,000 feet. So the center would provide training and internships for youth, primarily youth of color. And the project team was intending to hire instructors of color to prepare youth for careers in the arts and tech. And this is an example of a project that is focused on workforce development and job creation in an area of higher unemployment and working with residents who might be more likely to experience economic disparities. So the project team really thought about how to physically and programmatically connect the center to a nearby high school to help reduce participation barriers for local youth. So the team putting the project together had experience working with youth of color, particularly Black youth, through their previous programming, and this gave them more insight how to best meet the needs of youth participating in the programs. And that thoughtful intention about connections to the nearby high school was another thing that stood out to us, really thinking about how youth would interact with this site, what would make it easier for them to physically get to the new center, and what kind of partnerships would be needed to encourage more youth to participate in the programming.
So each of those are really great project examples for how projects can really address our housing and economic opportunity goals. To highlight some additional examples with more of a TOD perspective, this first project we wanted to share is the Opportunity Site in Brooklyn Center. This is an initial development that will begin a larger effort to transform the city's full 80-acre opportunity site. What was formerly a large hub of now abandoned big box stores, the city led a long and intensive engagement process to create a new vision for this place that would better reflect its changing communities and priorities. And the result of that was the goal of a new and modern downtown for the city. And this initial project that was awarded TOD funds includes an event center with a 24-hour childcare and academic learning center in one building, and 60 units of deeply affordable housing with family scale bedroomed units in a second building. So a number of things stood out about this project in the TOD review process. That deep involvement of the city and how this project fits into a larger system plan and community-informed vision for a broader area and its station area. And that this plan and vision was for dense, walkable, and affordable development that would serve community needs and connect to opportunities available across the region. Additionally, that mix of uses included and how each thoughtfully contributed to community-identified needs. Commercial uses are providing services that neighborhood residents and community identified were needed and missing in the station area. Businesses were created and brought in that offered living wage job opportunities, and that housing with a range of affordability levels and units that specifically served families. Another example with a bit more of a focus on economic opportunity that was successful in the TOD program in the last couple of years is the Keystone Community Service Project in St. Paul. Keystone's creating a 20,000 square foot community food center to consolidate their food shelf operations and mobile food distribution program into a single transit-oriented location along the Green Line LRT. And so this project includes grocery store style shopping for culturally specific foods, space for support services and community events, mobile food services, and warehousing. And the site was selected as a result of community engagement with Keystone's participants, and that will increase their ability to annually receive and distribute over 4 million pounds of food, doubling their opportunity to create economic impact and serve over 50,000 people. And additionally, make it a site that's more accessible to their clients and the people who are using their programs and services already. And so this is an example of a project that's focused on economic opportunity by providing needed services and amenities, and for residents who are more likely to experience economic disparities and be transit dependent. And so the project team was able to design and develop this to meet their specific audience's needs, from the site location to the different programs inside the project. And while this isn't necessarily a dense or mixed use development, this project reuses an existing building more efficiently, and through the nature of its programming, brings a significant level of intensity or the kind of a number of people to the site and to the station area around it, which incentivizes transit use. And then finally, one more additional example from a number of years ago is the Minneapolis American Indian Center on Franklin Avenue in Minneapolis. This project is an expansion and renovation of an existing building so as to accommodate new and growing programs that provide job opportunities and serve identified community needs. So this is kind of an example of a third space. It's not necessarily an office building or an apartment building, but this is a community destination that creates a core gathering place for cultural, social, arts, and fitness activities, and it serves a targeted population with the Native community in the region. And so all of that brings an intensity of use and raises the level of stationary activity around transit, which is, again, a really important factor in TOD, our TOD program criteria in that compact connected development section, and in creating kind of walkable urban areas.
And so I want to point out a thread that is woven between all of these projects. All of these projects have a very high level of intention and thought into who is going to be interacting with these projects and how those needs might differ depending on what kind of project it is. So all of these projects worked with folks who had similar lived experience, who might already be users of services, to understand what the best kind of design would be, both in programming or in physical design, to make the project the best project that it could be. The partnerships were very thoughtful and intentional. So if anyone has any additional questions about that, you want to talk through how your project fits in with this, don't hesitate to reach out, and we are happy to go over that with you. So, like we said, we have some time left for questions. We can go over some frequently asked questions that we often get, but we want to make sure that we have time to answer any questions from all of y'all to make sure that we're answering and giving you the best support that we can give you going into applications. So while everyone's gathering up their questions, typing them in the chat, we'll go ahead and go through these questions that we tend to get fairly often. So using web grants and registering and adding users, we touched on this earlier, but I want to go over that again. So we ask all of the government partners to please send the program coordinator a list of all of the individuals that are going to be working on your application. Each person will need to register on web grants, and the government partner will then add them as a collaborator under the general information tab in web grants. If you have ever had a web grants account in the past, you don't need to register for a new account. We can just add you to the account for the city that you're working with. If you don't remember your password, just reach out. We can help get you set up there. The required and optional attachments and the page limits. So the resolution of support, the grant requested activities plan, site plan, context plan, the Make a Maps from the LCA website, those are all required. We have a list of the required attachments on the website, and they're also listed out in web grants. For stormwater management, site acquisition, and some community engagement uses, we do ask for additional attachments there. And we ask that you limit any of your attachments to 10 pages. If the documents are longer than 10 pages, please take out the most relevant excerpt or an executive summary. If the documents are longer than 10 pages, we will ask you to correct that in your application. And we ask you to please name your applications. There's naming conventions in web grants. So we want to make sure that we have the city, the project name, and what the attachment is when you submit that. So going through scoring and the use of funds, we don't score on budget, what's requested. We're really looking at what your project is going to do. And again, if you have any questions about eligible activities, please reach out before you submit your application so we can make sure everything's eligible so we don't have to strike out that activity and lower your overall grant request. And finally, we get a lot of questions about whether or not you should apply to LCDA or if you should apply to TOD. So you can apply to either, and projects that are in TOD areas can apply to LCDA. You cannot apply to both programs for the same project. You need to choose one. TOD has more points for density, walkability, station area activity, and increasing transit use. So you can think about balancing your funding limits with a $2 million per city or that geographic distribution with LCDA to see how that project might be more competitive. So a lot of that does end up coming down to a choice made by the city. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and we're happy to talk through with you where your project might be the most competitive. And we can wait a couple more minutes and see if anyone has any questions. Stephen, is there anything that you want to add that we haven't touched on yet?
I think one other good one is I think on both of the program pages in the top sections, we've put links to what our awarded projects from the previous year were. Again, we change our program every year and scoring criteria are updated. We did not make significant changes this year, but we often hear and people ask, what kind of projects do you want to see or what kind of do you want to fund? I think looking back at previous years and the comments we have in those reports about why they were competitive and how they stood out against our criteria could be an additional helpful way to get you a better sense of what's really a good fit for the program and what's a good fit for the LCDA program versus the TOD program. And we're also, again, Hannah and I are happy to talk through those with anyone if you're interested.
Okay, it looks like we're not getting any more questions coming into the chat. So I will just reiterate one more time. please reach out to us if you are considering applying this year. It's always a good idea to just have a chat with Stephen or with me before you apply. We have our bookings links on the website, so you can just go directly into our calendars, put time on our calendars, and we can just talk through your application, answer any questions that you might have, talk through what might make it more competitive, and really help you along in that application process. So please don't be shy. We would love to hear from you. We would love to talk with you about your project before you apply. Okay, so criteria or resources or attachments for equitable development. So we do have a link to the Equitable Development Scorecard on our website. The Equitable Development Scorecard is really meant to be a framework for conversation between neighborhood groups, residents in the area, developer, and city. So we would encourage you to use the scorecard in that way as something to help you along with your engagement process. I think for our scoring, the best advice I have is to look at our evaluation explanations, look at the examples that we have for achieving points in those sections, and look at the questions that reviewers are going to be asking themselves while they go through your application. We also do have a section on equitable development on our resource page. So there's more information there about what equitable development means, some examples of projects that we're doing that had a strong focus on equitable development. But again, I think those evaluation explanations are going to be your best resource for that. Is there anything you want to add on that, Stephen?
No, I think that's right on.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for spending some time with us this morning. Again, if any questions pop up as you're thinking about this information session throughout the day, or you're getting started on your application, send us an email and we are happy to talk with you. Great. Thanks so much, everyone.